Recently, there has been an ongoing discussion online about Tarkov, the flea market, and Found and Raid, all components to this game that have been divisive since they were introduced years ago. Band-aids to problems deeply rooted in the game's ecosystem and general functionality. The question of should these mechanics be removed is simply not a deep enough question to ask. There are too many layers in this problem that spiral out of control the moment you begin to think about it on any of a deeper level. For the longest time, Nikita and BSG were very steadfast about these mechanics not going anywhere, especially the flea market. They made their bed and slept in it. However, as things have gotten rather tumultuous recently for BSG, curiously enough, Nikita has been more open to potentially adjusting these features for the future of the game. To what extent exactly, we're not entirely sure, but these questions are still good to ask regardless. Everyone has a little different opinion of the flea market and Found and Raid. Some want it to stay because it's so integral to the game, especially considering that there are other mechanics in the game built around the flea and Found and Raid, while others want it gone so we can get those early Tarkov feelings back once again. It's a tough position to be in as a developer. No matter what you do, people are going to be upset. So today I wanted to look at these features a little more closely and try to dissect the pros and cons of both keeping them around as well as removing them from the game. Again, it's just a conversation, and while I will add my own personal interjections on the matter, at the end of the day, this is BSG's game. They have the final say as to the mechanics that stay or get axed, so just keep that in mind as we go through this discussion. Let's start with the flea market because it feels a little more contentious than Found and Raid. Plus, one exists because of the other. The reasons why we have Found and Raid is because of hatchet runners getting to loot faster than everyone else with no risk involved, players from regions who are immediately leaving raids to boost their survival rating, not that it matters in the slightest, and people were able to make billions, with a B, of dollars on the first day of wipe because you could buy from the vendors and then throw those items on the flea market. But the flea was an intentional mechanic that was going to be added regardless of how the game state was at the time of implementation, and it has gone through a lot of changes. What was once a sprawling metropolitan society where everyone could buy and sell as they please has turned into a more restrained and reserved version of itself. There are many restrictions on the flea in terms of what items can and cannot be sold there. High-value weapons, armor plates, ammos, and any other equipment that players use to kill each other. But other than that, the flea is that for people to purchase goods and other items from other players. The economy of the flea is kind of fascinating to watch in real time, because as the wipe goes on, you can see where the community as a whole is regarding their own personal progression. At the start, hoses are like 6 figures, and then by the end, sugar, water filters, and the like are some of the most sought after items. And anytime an event occurs, which makes an important item, that value of the item skyrockets on the flea. It's always so interesting to see how the community reacts to the game around them. But as we all know, the only way before a recent change by BSG to put something up on the flea was for it to be found in Raid. This single phrase alone has baffled the community for years, because the phrase can have many interpretations, and the one it actually means kind of makes no sense. Okay, Found in Raid. That can mean that an item simply needs to be collected in a raid for it to count. Does that count as PMC gear? The weapons and armor? What about their meds, mags, and everything else? Sadly, no, that's not what it means. Found in Raid is confusing because items that are crafted in your hideout are found in Raid. But wait, that doesn't make sense. Quest rewards are also classified as Found in Raid, but that item never even left the menus. How does that work? Items you do find in Raid but leave too early with and get a run through no longer count as Found in Raid, because to keep that status, you need to survive that raid, and a run through doesn't count as surviving. You can see how messy this gets. And all to try and stop people from farming items with no risk and increasing their survival rating for literally no reason. These changes feel more reactive than anything, instead of looking at the situation and taking some time to craft a couple potential solutions. They came up with one quickly and slapped it into the game, not knowing the ramifications of how the entire game would function because of its existence. Found in Raid was ultimately the choice made by BSG to try and fix, well, everything. cheesing quests, your survival rating, the flea market. It encompasses pretty much every facet of the game we interact with. Surprisingly, there are quests in the game that still to this day don't interact with Found and Raid for one reason or another. Ragman's supervisor quest, requiring you to give him a Goshen cash register key, doesn't have to be found in Raid. Even in his flavor text, he specifically says, quote, "Don't care where you get the key, you can just buy it from the traders for all I care." I always found it strange how some quests are omitted from this dictator-ish style of rule, where everything must follow Found and Raid procedures. Well, I guess not, because there are quests that don't require Found and Raid. Not many, but they do exist. We know why they added it, however, I am still blown away at the why. Again, we know why, but at a deeper level, I'm surprised this never got adjusted over the years. Found and Raid has kind of stayed almost exactly the same since it was implemented, with the exception of how getting survive status when exiting raids being adjusted for EXP and time. Found and Raid hasn't been altered to a degree that was noticeable or universally praised by the community as a whole. We've all been there. You find an item you've needed for a quest, and you've been stuck on it for days or even weeks. You bolt straight to extract, you check the timer, you think, alright, I'm good, and you leave, only to be off by maybe less than 5 seconds, and you see that dreaded white run-through status, thus making that quest item and everything else you looted not found in Raid. Oh, we've all felt that sting of that loss, and cursed Nikita's name into the sky. It sucks a lot when this happens, but in reality, if things were done a little differently, we might have never had to deal with it in the first place. Tarkov has a lot of these weird choices for mechanics and rules within its own game. So many tiny quirks that are explored and discovered over time with experience put into the game. Some that make sense and are actually really cool to use, and others that are just baffling. Found and Raid being one of the most contentious ones to date that is still around in the game. To this day, I still stand by the idea that Tarkov is a better experience without the flea market. I know it's pretty much blasphemous to say at this point, but as someone who spent a decent amount of time with the game before it was added, there was something about not having instant access to whatever you needed that made the game feel gritty and dirty. You wanted something, you either had to level up and work to get it from a trader, or if they didn't have it, you had to take it out of someone's hands, dead or alive. No Flea also made money a slightly harder commodity to come by, because there weren't an infinite amount of people wanting to buy whatever you decide to sell on the flea market. Back in the day, if you had a couple million rubles, that was the equivalent of having 100 million today. The power curve of Tarkov is seriously no joke. Again, most people who have played Tarkov have been around with the flea market, so removing it from them might have more of an impact than for those who played without it. I always thought Nikita and BSG were very steadfast in their decision to never remove the flea, but now there is a tiny, insignificant percentage chance that at the very least it might get adjusted in some regard or outright removed. Again, the chances of the game getting to 1.0 this year are higher and more likely than the flea market getting taken away, but you never really know. Found and Raid has honestly just been a pain in the ass for years now, and the flea is something I would genuinely like to see removed for just a wipe cycle at least, just to test the experience and what it's like without it in 2024. But again, the rest of the game is so interconnected to the flea market and Found and Raid that it would most likely just make the entire house of cards fall apart. So many band-aid fixes on top of each other has ultimately backed BSG into a corner where they need the Flea and Found and Raid in the game together, otherwise Tarkov might not work in terms of the economy. However, despite all the negativity behind Found and Raid existing, there is one thing about the mechanic that genuinely makes Tarkov better. And it's whenever you do find the item you've been searching for weeks to find, and you pick it up and you hear that quest ding, your anxiety goes through the roof and you say out loud, I need to leave this raid. There isn't a feeling that has been replicated by many other games, and especially other shooters. It's what initially motivates people to keep playing Tarkov when they're new. That's how they get the bug. And with the removal of Found and Raid, that feeling would kind of go away. Especially if we're still able to sell non-Found and Raid items on the Flea. But one thing is certain, one cannot exist without the other with how BSG has handled their balance of the game. Which one needs the other? I'll leave that up to you. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Let me know in the comments section your thoughts on the Flea, Found and Raid, and how these changes could be improved to make Tarkov a better experience, and be sure to subscribe for more videos dissecting mechanics about Tarkov that can make or break the game experience as a whole. I hope to see you in future ones.